He looks like a mistake nature forgot to fix. Legs too long, a heavy drooping snout, an expression that borders on comical. In cartoons, he's always the forest fool. In national parks, tourists step out of their cars to snap a photo, as if standing in front of an unusually tall wild cow. But across parts of the northern hemisphere, this animal injures and kills more people every year than bears and wolves combined. Not through venom, not through fangs, not through a predator's instinct. He's a herbivore. He eats leaves, snaps twigs with his lips, chews slowly at the edge of a half-frozen lake. And yet, rangers in Alaska and Yellowstone rank him among the most dangerous animals to encounter in the woods. More dangerous, in some seasons, than the grizzly bear sharing the same trail. The question almost nobody asks is the right one. How did a giant plant-eating deer become this? Standing at the edge of a frozen marsh, a moose doesn't look fast. The body is heavy. The legs seem disproportionate, the gait slow and deliberate, almost lazy. Then he runs. An adult bull can weigh over 1,000 pounds and still reach speeds comparable to a galloping horse, sustaining that pace through dense forest without tangling those impossibly long legs. Shoulder height clears 6 feet. That's not just a spec sheet number. It's the difference between being struck under a car's frame or through the windshield. Vehicle collisions with moose tend to be more fatal for the driver than for the animal, precisely because of that brutal geometry. The front legs, wide and tipped with sharp hooves, aren't just for walking through deep snow. They're a weapon. A moose kick carries enough force to break bone. And it's the animal's first line of defense, not the last resort. But the body alone doesn't explain why he's so feared. Plenty of large animals are peaceful. What actually worries wildlife specialists isn't in the muscle, it's in the mind. A moose lives alone. No pack, no organized herd, no dependence on anyone else to survive. And that changes everything about how he responds to danger. Herd animals, like most deer and smaller cervids, tend to flee together at the first sign of a threat. A moose doesn't. He assesses. And if he decides the threat isn't leaving, he charges. During rutting season, bulls enter a state of aggression that rangers have learned to fear more than most bears. Elevated testosterone, territory to defend, rivals nearby. The result is a half-ton animal that will charge through the forest at anything resembling competition, occasionally including humans who had no idea they were near a bull mid-contest. There's another trigger, arguably more dangerous still: females with calves. One of the most repeated myths about large herbivores is that if you don't touch the baby, the mother won't attack. With moose, that rule simply doesn't hold. A cow can read a simple approach, even from a dog on a leash, even from a distance, as enough of a threat to strike first and sort it out later. It's this behavior, more than any raw statistic on strength, that starts to explain why Alaska Rangers treat moose with more caution than grizzlies during certain months of the year. But the mind alone still doesn't tell the whole story. Because somewhere in this equation sits the factor that actually turns statistics into tragedy: us. In Anchorage, Alaska, it's not unusual for moose to wander through residential neighborhoods in winter, drawn in by ornamental shrubs and leftover garden greens. Locals learn early a rule that sounds exaggerated until you understand the reason behind it. Never let your dog run loose near a moose. Dogs trigger something ancient in a moose's brain. Low silhouette, quick movement, sharp barking. It all resembles a wolf. And the wolf, historically, is the moose's natural predator. The response isn't flight. It's a preemptive strike. There are documented cases year after year of homeowners who took their dog for a walk and ended up in a confrontation they never chose. The moose charges the dog. The owner tries to intervene. And what started as a quiet walk in front of the house turns into a desperate sprint to the nearest door. National parks like Denali and Yellowstone log similar incidents every year involving tourists who get too close trying to get a photo. usually misjudging the safe distance because the animal standing still looks too calm to be dangerous. The pattern repeats often enough to make one thing clear. These aren't isolated cases of an animal that just snapped. It's predictable territorial defense repeated at scale whenever humans misjudge the line between curiosity and provocation. And if that already worries wildlife authorities, the reason behind it is even more unsettling. Almost nobody sees the moose as a real threat until they're already too close to back away. Part of the problem is aesthetic. An animal with a gangly build, drooping ears, and an almost comically elongated snout doesn't trigger the same visual alarm as a bear or a wolf. Pop culture reinforces this. The moose almost always shows up as the goofy character, tripping over his own legs, the punchline in winter-themed cartoons and ads. There's even an informal bias behind this that biologists sometimes point to. The brain associates plant-eating animals with passive behavior and reserves instinctive fear for predators with visible teeth. But that association ignores something crucial. None of these animals need to hunt to be dangerous. They only need to feel threatened. Compared to the grizzly bear, an animal most park visitors already treat with extreme caution, the moose racks up documented incidents at a rate that seems to the public almost counterintuitive. That's not because the moose is naturally more aggressive. It's because people approach him the way they'd approach a cow, when they should be approaching him the way they'd approach an armed animal. That single misjudged distance is, on its own, the root of most recorded incidents. But there's still one characteristic, a single biological advantage that explains why, when the confrontation actually happens, it tends to be so much worse than anyone expects. It's not raw strength. It's not speed alone, though that helps. The moose's real deadly advantage is unpredictability combined with height. Most large animals telegraph aggression. They crouch, bare teeth, pin their ears back. A moose often gives no clear signal before charging. He can be standing still, chewing, seemingly indifferent, and in the next instant already in full motion, skipping the warning phase humans have learned to expect from other large mammals. Add the height of impact. A kick delivered from 6 feet off the ground, from a leg weighing dozens of pounds, lands on the human body in a zone that tends to cause severe damage, chest, head, spine, precisely because most instinctive human defenses, like ducking or shielding with the arms, are calibrated for threats coming from below, not from above. It's that combination, no warning, height, mass, that makes a solitary, fangless, venomless herbivore one of the most feared entries in forest safety manuals across the northern hemisphere. He isn't the strongest animal in the woods. He's arguably the most miscalculated. None of this makes the moose a monster. It actually makes him an extraordinarily successful survivor. For millions of years, the real threat to a moose was never a human standing a few feet away with a phone. It was the wolf, the bear, brutal winters, scarce food buried under feet of snow. An animal that lives alone, with no herd to protect him, has to be able to defend himself, fast, with no room for hesitation. The unpredictability that so alarms park visitors is, from an evolutionary standpoint, pure efficiency. No time wasted on warnings, no energy spent on theatrical intimidation. Just a direct response to a perceived threat. Ecologically, the moose also plays a role few people remember. By feeding on aquatic vegetation and young shoots, he shapes the composition of entire forests and wetlands, controlling the growth of certain plants, and in turn, sustaining the balance of habitats that other species depend on. The danger he represents isn't cruelty, it's the cold, efficient logic of an animal built to survive alone in one of the harshest environments on Earth, one that never had an evolutionary reason to tell a curious tourist apart from a disguised predator. Go back to the opening image. The animal standing at the edge of the frozen marsh, long legs, heavy snout, looking at first glance like nature's gentle mistake. He's still there, chewing slowly, indifferent to the camera. Except now, you know what's behind that stillness. Half a ton of mass capable of running like a horse, a defense system that skips the warnings, and an evolutionary memory that still sees, in any sudden movement nearby, the shadow of a wolf about to strike. He isn't the villain of the forest. He may be the quietest reminder that nature saves its greatest dangers not for the creatures that look threatening, but for the ones we've learned wrongly to underestimate.